welcome to this special edition of Jerusalem Dateline. I'm Chris Mitchell. In 1967, Israel captured the West Bank from Jordan in the Six-Day War. Since then, U.S. and world leaders have called Israel's presence there illegal and illegitimate. Today, the West Bank is still referred to as occupied territory. But are those terms historically correct? Here's a look at Israel's claims to the land.
It's the oldest land dispute in history. For centuries, Jews and Arabs have both claimed to be the rightful owners of the land of Israel. Jewish claims to the land are based on four main arguments. The first is God's promise to Abraham. Israeli Prime Minister David Ben-Gurion often said that the Bible was the Jewish mandate for settling the land of Israel. In the book of Genesis, God gave the land to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the patriarchs of Israel. And the rest of the Bible tells the story of their descendants in the land. Moses led the Jews back to Israel after their exile in Egypt. And roughly 400 years later, around 1000 BC, King David conquered the city of Jerusalem and built his capital there. But the story of the Jews isn't limited to the borders of modern Israel. Their footprints have been traced throughout Judea and Samaria, now the Palestinian West Bank. Bethel, where Jacob dreamed of a ladder to heaven. Shiloh, the resting place of the Ark of the Covenant. Bethlehem, the birthplace of King David. And Hebron, where the Jewish patriarchs are buried.
This is all not just documented in the Bible and in history. It also reveals itself in every inch of the land. In any archaeological dig, you just scratch the surface and you find a rich Jewish culture and history of more than 3,500 years, ever since King David built Jerusalem 3,010 years ago.
The Jewish rule over Israel was also documented outside the Bible, often by the enemies of Israel. In Egypt, an inscription on the Merneptah Stela proclaimed in the 13th century BC that Israel has been laid waste. In 840 BC, the Moabite king Mesha wrote about the house of David, as did another king a century later, Hazael of Damascus. In the 1st century AD, the Jewish historian Josephus described in great detail the Jewish temple in Jerusalem and its destruction by the Romans, a story confirmed by a relief in the Arch of Titus in Rome. Every day, archaeology yields more evidence of ancient Jewish culture dating back thousands of years. And in the 20th century, that historical connection has been recognized several times by international law. In 1917, British Foreign Secretary Arthur Balfour issued a declaration calling for a Jewish homeland in Palestine, also known then as southern Syria.
Palestine included at the time all the territory which is now Israel, which is also Judea and Samaria, the West Bank, and Jordan.
In 1920, Allied leaders gathered in San Remo, Italy to divide the remains of the Ottoman Empire. They created the San Remo Resolution, which incorporated the Balfour Declaration. The resolution was signed by the members of the League of Nations, and the British were put in charge of Palestine. That meant they were legally bound to help the Jewish people build a state there. 2 years later, in 1922, the League adopted the British Mandate for Palestine, which recognized the historical connection of the Jewish people and the need for reconstituting their national home there. By that time, the land allocated to the Jewish people had been drastically reduced, with more than 75% of it going to the new Arab kingdom of Transjordan. The mandate was signed by all 51 members of the League of Nations. And once again, a Jewish state was guaranteed by international law. But 25 years later, that state still existed only on paper. And in 1945, the League was replaced by the United Nations. Article 80 of the UN Charter states that the UN would not alter existing states, peoples, or mandates, which means the UN legally recognized the right of the Jewish people to settle in Palestine, from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea.
The United Nations is the legal successor and inheritor of the League of Nations, which means all obligations, commitments, and pledges of the League of Nations must be upheld by the United Nations. Unfortunately, they did not do it in the case of Israel and the Jewish ownership over their land.
In November 1947, the land intended for the Jews was divided once again. The UN voted to partition what was left of Palestine into two parts. 56% would be a Jewish state, with 43% going to an Arab state to be annexed to Jordan. Once again, a Jewish state was mandated by international law. Israel declared its independence in 1948. And a year later, the new state was admitted to the United Nations. But despite numerous legal endorsements, Israel's borders would still be disputed for decades to come, as Arab leaders incited violence against Israel.
The Mufti, Hajj Amin al-Husseini, say, what they, the United Nations, write with ink, we destroyed by blood.